environment and natural resources. Her primary role is with the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative. Lacey is a graduate of the Maritime College of Forest Technology. Upon graduation, her first forestry job was with the CFS, Canadian Forest Service, in Fredericton, New Brunswick, where she completed research projects focusing on brown spruce longhorn beetle, effects of silviculture treatments on tree growth, and calibrating LiDAR technology. Lacey decided to return home to Nova Scotia, where she accepted a job with J.D. Irving as a scaler and later switching to harvest block layout. Lacey's been working at the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq since 2021. She's excited to be working in a role where she can use her forestry knowledge in a way that is more aligned with her own values, and is pleased to have the opportunity to practice forestry through a Mi'kmaq lens. Elizabeth hangs her professional hat at the Etuaptmumk Institute of Natural Resources as the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative Lead, where she's learning about traditional ways of conservation and connections with the land. In her current role, she strives to promote and enable Mi'kmaq rights in the forestry sector and works with partners in the industry and in government to build relationships that support communities, the environment, and the sector in general. Elizabeth holds a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Biology from Cape Breton University and is currently a graduate student at Dalhousie School for Resource and Environmental Studies, working in the space where forest carbon dynamics, forestry, and sustainability community energy intersect. Building a deep understanding of the relationships between forest ecosystems and the human place within has guided her career path and the various projects she volunteers on. Elizabeth spent years conducting field research in source watershed forests and streams with ACAP Cape Breton and CBRN Water Utility, and was one of the founding members of the Bedore Lakes Biosphere Reserve Association's Forest Watch pilot. And this connected local school children with forest ecosystems and concepts of interconnectivity and stewardship of the watershed. Lacey and Elizabeth will be providing information today regarding the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative and teaching us about several important words and concepts such as Netukulimk. It's a hard word, but you'll be teaching us how to say that, and from which we can all learn. Welcome, Lacey and Elizabeth.
Good day, everyone. Deloisi Elizabeth Jessome. My name is Elizabeth Jessome. I'm really excited to speak to you today about these earlier establishment years of the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative, as well as to introduce you to some Mi'kmaq concepts of Mimaju'nsuti, Netukulimk, and Etuaptmumk.
Gwen, me Deloisi Lacey Robbins. Hi, my name is Lacey Robbins. I am one of the forest technicians with the MFI. As nervous as I am to be up here today, I'm very excited to share with you the good work that I think that we're doing in the province. So just to give you a quick overview on what we'll be discussing today, Elizabeth's going to talk to you about what is the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative and how we got started. We'll go over where our land base is located. We'll talk about the goals and values of the initiative, some Mi'kmaq principles that guide the work that we do, and what we've been hearing from the community as far as what Mi'kmaq forestry is, and then we'll touch on our MFI operations to date and what we have planned going forward.
So the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative is a province-wide initiative here in Nova Scotia that is aiming to develop a space for Mi'kmaq in the forestry sector, a Mi'kmaq-led forestry sector. It's governed by the Nova Scotia Assembly of Mi'kmaq Chiefs and led by the boards of directors as well from the Etuaptmumk Institute of Natural Resources and the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. It's steered by the Mi'kmaq Forestry Advisory Committee, a group of partners which are comprised of the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq, the Etuaptmumk Institute of Natural Resources, as well as the Mi'kmaq Rights Initiative. And we've also received great support from the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, as well as federal partners with the Government of Canada. So the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative is something that has been in the works for over a decade. A lot of different folks have worked on this project before Lacey and I. And really a turning point, I think, was that independent review of forest practices by the Leahy report, which recommended a license agreement and incorporation of Mi'kmaq values into the Nova Scotia forestry sector. And so in 2019, the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative pilot was born in the form of an agreement between the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia and the province of Nova Scotia. So today, we're excited to say that the land base is just over 30,000 hectares of crown land spread throughout the province.
So our largest land base is located in St. Croix, which is kind of the St. Margaret's Bay area. We have just over 12.5 thousand hectares there, and it spans Hants County and Halifax County. Our second largest land base is located in Digby County. We're very fortunate that this land base is located right next to Bear River First Nations, so it's great for having community access that land, and that's just under 8,000 hectares that we have there. And then in the eastern lands, selection was a little more difficult, so the pieces are kind of scattered all through Cape Breton and eastern mainland, but this is kind of beneficial because then it makes proximity to communities closer for those land bases. So that works out good.
So the goals and values of the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative, what are we trying to accomplish? Essentially, we want to practice restoration-based forestry and restore the Mi'kmaq forest. Perhaps a small sample of what would have been here before we began interfering or existing with forest ecosystems. And so we have been working to develop a Mi'kmaq framework for forest ecosystem stewardship that's based on traditional values that have evolved with Mi'kmaq communities over tens of thousands of years, as well as working to build Mi'kmaq capacity in the forestry sector itself, providing not only economic but also educational opportunities to our community members, and facilitating knowledge transfer between generations. So I'm sure that's something many of you in the room can appreciate, making sure that those who have done this work for many years and have great experience get to share those with the next generations and those who are coming up. We're also, another goal of the initiative is to create spaces for Mi'kmaq community members to really rekindle that connection with the forested landscape. For quite a while, Mi'kmaq communities have been separated or restricted from accessing the land in ways that they traditionally would have. So these lands are really very significant and take us down the path towards reconciliation and what that might mean in Nova Scotia. And so we've heard it loud and clear from community members that these spaces are so significant not only for forestry activities, but for the keeping of customary practices and rituals. And so these are our goals, but to understand what sort of forest management we will practice, we have to ask what values are we managing for. And so we've asked ourselves what are the community needs at play here, and what values are important to communities in these woodlands. And so we want to introduce you today some Mi'kmaq guiding principles that really form the foundation of our work at the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative. So the first concept we want to introduce to you is a very untold, very ancient concept. Has been around for a very long time and passed down through many, many, many generations, thousands of years. So Mimaju'nsuti, and depending on what language keeper you speak to, there are different ways to interpret the word. Usually if we have one word in English, there's a dozen or more meanings in Mi'kmaq. And so Mimaju'nsuti really speaks to the relationship that we have with the land, reminds us that we are an animal, we are a part of these landscapes and ecosystems that we work with. It asks us to, think about how we interact with the environment and asks us to go forward and cause the least amount of harm. So harvest what we need to sustain ourselves and our communities, but ensure that we're leaving enough for others. Some elders interpret Mimaju'nsuti, that concept, as life giver. The earth is our life giver and sustains us all. It also talks a bit about our actions on the land, how we gather, how we rejuvenate and replenish the landscape. So, Mimaju'nsuti.
Netukulimk is another guiding principle that we carry on the MFI. It's a very deep concept, and as Mimaju'nsuti, it is also it's been practiced for centuries. Essentially, it is using the resources of the land in a sustainable way. So, using what the land gives us in a respectful way, whether that be things for economic well-being or nutrition or medicines, but using that with an understanding that we have to be respectful, we have to leave enough for future generations, and we're not compromising the integrity of that resource. Okay, so we want to make sure that those things are going to be around for 7 generations, and the next 7 generations, and then the generations after that. Etuaptmumk translates in English as something you might have heard as two-eyed seeing. So that's looking, we all know we can see better with 2 eyes. So that's looking at like one eye as being strengths of traditional indigenous knowledge, and then the other eye as seeing through the strengths of Western science. And so looking through both eyes together, we are only stronger in the future in many areas, not just forestry.
And the final concept we wanted to introduce to you today is Etuaptmumk. And this one's quite commonly used, you may have heard of it. And essentially, Etuaptmumk translates to all my relations, or all of our relations. And so when we say Etuaptmumk, we're not only talking about other animals, plants, we're talking about everything, the rocks, the water, the air, fungi, microorganisms, everything that is out there and that forms the system or the whole. And so again, it asks us to remind ourselves to be humble. We are part of these ecosystems. And as you all well know, working in the woods, we need them, and we need them to be healthy. We're all interconnected. And so those concepts we just introduced, I think even if you wouldn't use the same words to describe them, I think as forest stewards, you can relate to them and would have your own kind of phrases or words that relate to those concepts. We want to go through now, so we're entering our 4th year of the Mi'kmaq Forestry Initiative, and even through COVID, we've been so lucky to be able to engage deeply with Mi'kmaq communities. And sometimes that took the form of an informal cup of tea at a kitchen table, or a walk in the forest where we brought elders and youth together. Other times it was more formal research projects that were convening focus groups or conducting one-on-one or group interviews. So we're excited to share with you what we've heard through these last years from Mi'kmaq communities.
So I'm just going to read to you a few of the things that we heard from community on what is Mi'kmaq forestry. So Mi'kmaq forestry is traditional timber species and products, species and materials of cultural significance such as paper birch, wildlife trees, teepee poles, and craftwood. Mi'kmaq forestry is NTFP, so foraged goods, crafts, medicines, and cultural experiences and products such as food and tourism. Mi'kmaq forestry is forest management services. Hopefully someday private wood loggers like yourself will be able to hire someone to practice these kinds of, or to help see these values on your own woodlots. Education and initiatives, land-based learning, and carbon and climate change mitigation and adaptation.
And so communities have told us, yes, we're very interested in the timber opportunities available on these lands, but they also see it very broadly. So here's an opportunity for working woodlands that are serving multiple values, viewing harvest right alongside with recreational trails and that sort of thing. So some other things that we've heard from community members, and I should say we've engaged everyone from respected elders and knowledge keepers in the community right down to youth and school classrooms. So again, one of I think this was our most prevalent response when we asked, what is Mi'kmaq forestry, what does it mean to you, was the significance of Mi'kmaq communities just having the land that was there for them to care for and interact with. And so that reconnection with the land, the idea of cultural revitalization, the keeping of traditional practices, and again, that intergenerational knowledge exchange, moving from elder and knowledge people down to youth, that was most important to communities to see realized in this initiative. One elder put it really well when they said, step slowly and plan well. So take the time to first become a part of the landscape, and then you can better make the plans and understand what's out there and how to care for it. Great interest in the opportunity here for land-based teaching and learning. The Mi'kmaq language is a very verb-based language that evolved from close interactions with the land, and so there's great excitement to have these spaces again, not only for education, but specifically for language revitalization. We've heard loud and clear that any economic opportunities we pursue must first uphold those Mi'kmaq concepts that we introduced to you, and particularly Netukulimk. We have to maintain the integrity of forest ecosystems, respecting the cycles of life and death and that natural turnover, as well as biodiversity. The idea of healing the land while healing communities came up a lot in conversations as well. We heard a lot about communities desiring selection management, favoring high retention and restoration of diverse forests, of course where that makes sense. Most of our land base is in the Acadian forest type, and so this is a fit for that. There's interest in seeing the opportunity to produce veneer quality logs and large diameter white birch. Many of the elders spoke about stories that had been passed down to them about the birch that were once here. With climate change, as James kind of spoke to earlier, we might have some challenges, but anyway, we've been asked to do some research and to see the possibility for white birch. As well, there's great interest. We all know there's housing shortages in every community, so what opportunity is there here to produce timber and lumber for building homes in community? Food security came up quite often. These spaces, communities were excited to have opportunities for hunting and gathering, cultivating like actively along with trees, medicinal foods and plants. There's interest in the opportunity for research, climate change monitoring and adaptation, mitigation, species at risk, and what we're calling biocultural indicators. So according to Mi'kmaq communities and values, identifying those things on the land that are key for the maintenance of the culture over time. We also heard loud and clear that communities expect us to minimize our impacts on forest hydrology, so the flow of water and the interactions on the land, maintain the integrity of wetlands and of that soil layer, the living layer of the soil.
So I'm going to touch on our MFI operations to date. So we started operations in St. Croix in 2020. We had no active operations in 2022 as far as harvests go, but we have been actively doing pre-commercial thinning on the land base. So in St. Croix, we have 2 single tree selections. One is a sugar maple dominant stand. It's about 11 hectares. And we also had a red spruce stand that was about 8 hectares. We also have an irregular shelterwood trial. James had talked about that in his presentation. We're very fortunate that our irregular shelterwood was not hit by Fiona. It was 9 hectares in size, roughly half of that being a control and the other half being the treatment. And this is in partnership with Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. And we've got a permanent sample plot, and so hopefully we'll be able to gather some research from that over the years. We have a pretty big commercial thinning that we did on the St. Croix land base as well. It's 94 hectares. That was heavily impacted by Fiona, so we're looking at least about 60 hectares of cleanup for that. The difference with the commercial thinning we did on the MFI versus traditionally what you'll see is we did leave a high component of hardwood to get that biodiversity back into those stands. And going forward for planned operations, in St. Croix this year we are going to do a single tree selection. We'll be doing a high retention gap shelter wood and a uniform shelter wood. And as well, we'll be doing the cleanup that I had mentioned. In Digby, we're going to do a uniform shelter wood. In our eastern lands, we have some cleanup planned from Fiona down there. There's uniform gap shelter wood with reserves. And then the PTA has told us we're doing a partial overstory removal with 1/3 retention, but we're working on modifying our prescription either to be a modified shelter wood or a commercial thinning. And we will continue to do pre-commercial thinning on all the land bases that we can, and as well we'll be upkeeping roads and building new roads where we need to.
See up here, we actually, before Fiona, just built a beautiful road into that block, and now it'll be a beautiful road to a beautiful cleanup operation, which I'm sure some of you are in the same boat. And so going forward, there's a lot of work to do. So we're going to continue to focus on fostering that connection with communities. We were fortunate to speak to maybe over 100 community members these last few years, but that's a very small sample of all the folks out there with an interest in this land base. So we're going to continue to develop those relationships. We're excited to continue to develop relationships with the industry as well in the sector in general. So many of you in the room, as well as some of the different companies out there, as well as government relations. Continue to work with our provincial and federal partners to invest in this initiative. There are a lot of knowledge gaps, as I'm sure you can appreciate, setting out to do something like this. We've really been taking the time to build something ground up with communities, and so there's a lot to learn. Again, we also want to continue to foster that connection with the land base, making sure that we're getting youth out there, speaking about the opportunity, getting out there with, folks in the sector to understand all the good work that's happening, and so really focus on connections going forward. Lalio, thank you all. Time for questions.